Well, Donald Trump won illegally the 2016 election by gerrymandering the Electoral College despite losing the Republican vote and trying to do a coup d'etat in 2020 failed. Even though back in 2016 he admitted that if he lost the 2016 election, he would ignore and consider a fraud and do what he did in 2020. It's not the first time that happened. In fact, the last time the election was rigged in favor would be considered the Bush and Al Gore election 2000, which is the second closest presidential election in American history. But before that, probably the most illegal thing that's ever happened in history of presidential elections was Ronald Reagan's, who has been confirmed after years later that he stole the election, called the October Surprise. Great article, two articles today by Franco Marcelli called Ronald Reagan October Surprise Plot Was Real After All. A patch of widely released documents confirmed what many had long suspected. Ronald Reagan's 1980 presidential campaign worked behind the scenes to delay the release of the U.S. hostage in Iran for the benefit of Reagan's re-election campaign. It raised the question, when was the last time a Republican won a presidential election without the help of dirty tricks? The 2020 began with such hair-raising bliss of Iran-related news that you probably missed the bombshell revelation about U.S.-Iranian relations that came with the end of the 2010s. Rather than a potential U.S.-Iran war today, this story transports us back to a more innocent time, when politics was about principles and Republican presidents were decent men, the beginning of the Reagan era. A question in the 1980 presidential election became Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter, especially the October surprise that is alleged to have handed Reagan the election. Long dismissed as conspiracy theory, the whole saga is lengthy and convoluted, but the core allegation is this: that in the middle of the Iran hostage crisis, Reagan campaign made secret deals with new rulers of Iran to delay the release of the hostage until after the election, dooming Carter's chance of victory. The allegation, dodgily pursued by late investigation journalist Robert Perry, spawned books and even 1992 congressional investigation, which determined there was no credible evidence supporting any attempt or proposal to attempt by Reagan presidential campaign to delay the release of the American hostage in Iran. Perry and others into the case were attacked in the media, with much of the issue revolved around whether or not Reagan's campaign matched or alert. Later, Free Press hating CIA Director William Casey had traveled to Mardia on a particular date to meet with Iranian government representatives. Well, nearly 17 years after the House of October Surprise Task Force concluded the whole idea was bunk, an outlet no less vulnerable to the New York Times had turned that conclusion on its head. Just 3 days out from a new decade, the Times published that any other era would have been bombshell story based on the documents donated to Yale from the office of David Rockefeller, the former chair of Chase Manhattan Corporation. Ostensibly, the story about how Rockefeller Chase worked behind the scenes to win their election, the represented Shah of Iran, safe haven in the United States. This nugget of information appeared about halfway through, and I quote, the team around Mr. Rockefeller, a lifelong Republican with a dim view on Mr. Carter's dovish foreign policy, collaborated closely with the Reagan campaign in its effort to preempt and discourage what is decisively labeled as October Surprise, a pre-elected release of the American hostage, the papers show. The Chase team helped the Reagan campaign gather and spread rumors about the possible payoffs to win the release, a propaganda effort the Carter administration official had said impeded talks to free the captives. I had given my all, to thwart any effort of the Carter official to pull off a long suspected October surprise. Mr. Reed wrote in a letter to his family after the election, apparently referring to the Chase effort to track, discourage, and hostage release deals. He was later named Mr. Reagan's ambassador to Morocco. Mr. Reed was Joseph Reed Jr. Rockefeller Chief of Staff, who mandated the document should stay sealed until Rockefeller's death, which came in 2017. It's not hard to see why. Critics will guardedly say these documents don't prove the actual specific long-held October surprise conspiracy. This is true. According to the Times, they don't show Reagan striking a deal with the Iranians to delay the release of the American hostage until after the election, but simply working behind the scenes to thwart negotiations to free them. Perhaps someone out there exists who thinks this is better. Of course, there isn't only shenanigans Reagan got up to during that election. His campaign also fascinatingly got hold of Carter's debate strategy papers in advance, and their one and only debate in 1980. and less famously was alleged to have used retired CIA officials and a mole within Carter administration to gather information about foreign policy, mostly as the Times reported in 1983, in relation to the Iran hostage crisis. For those counting, those now at least four of the last six Republican presidents who have won election with the assistance of some sort of pre-elected skullduggery, including Richard Nixon's toppling peace of Vietnam, George W. Bush campaign shenanigans in Florida, and later use of the Swift boat Veterans for Truth, and Donald Trump's boost for Russian hacking of Democratic Party email, even if that wasn't coordinated. Not to mention the use of voter suppression that unites them all. That's not counting George H. W. Bush getting help from John Major's government in the UK in his bid to beat Hillary Clinton in 1992. This story is also a perfect example of the way the worlds of capital, politics, and world affairs belong together. The head of one of the country's largest banks helping his right-wing political allies unseat their opponent and saving the skin of one lucrative foreign dictator, all while drawing the expertise of a team of political elites from Henry Kissinger and former CIA director to members of one of the country's most prominent political families. Big businesses and political establishment had long worked together, and they used to do it more quietly. As understand as it was, his remarkable story how it receives little attention at all. And the great continuation este, by Bernardo Marci that once dismissed as Ronald Reagan's Octopus Prize is now confirmed to be true. It's not a conspiracy theory. Ronald Reagan secretly negotiated to keep Iran hostage captive for an extended period to try to keep President Jimmy Carter from winning elections. It seems like some small micro justice, a cosmic justice to pull as a former US President Jimmy Carter lies in hospice awaiting death. The long alleged but never proven political crime has sabotaged his re-elected just got another major piece of cooperation. This is the original total surprise. The charge that Ronald Reagan, Carter's Republican opponent in the 1980 presidential election, made a secret deal with a new fundamentalist Iranian government to delay release the American hostage held in the wake of revolution that brought it to power. The 444-day-long hostage crisis had become a major black mark of Carter's presidency, and revealed before the election would have given him a major unexpected bump going into voting, hence the phrase October surprise. Though it was long been charged that Reagan campaigned with victory, and the site went behind the US government back to secretly reach out to Iranian and prevent his bomb from happening. This weekend, the New York Times published an explosive piece of evidence back in 2023 that backs it up. Ben Barnes, a former Texas politician, told the paper how he and his mentor, former Democratic Texas Governor John Connally, who had run for GOP nomination in 1980 and had blown Reagan administration posts in his eyes, traveled around the Middle East, delivering a message to be delayed in Iranian leadership that Reagan would give them a better deal when he won the presidency. Connally then briefed Reagan's campaign chair, William Casey, about the effort upon returning home. According to Barnes, while acknowledging that confirming the account is problematic, the Times did, to its credit, corroborate parts of the story. Four prominent Texans confirmed in the paper that Barnes had told them the story years earlier, and various personal records of back up Barnes' claim about his and Connolly's travel dates and location. Their contact with Reagan campaign at their meeting with Casey about getting back. But this is far from the only recent piece of reporting backing up the October surprise story. A little more than 3 years ago, the Times published another report that touched on the matter, this one charging that Chase the Manhattan Corporation chair David Rockefeller, brother of the GOP politician Nelson, and team assembly at the bank helped the Reagan campaign gather spread rumors about the possible payoffs to win the release. Unlike the most recent Times piece, this report was one based on documents that had been sealed until Rockefeller's death, one of which was later formed his chief of staff, incidentally named Reagan's ambassador to Morocco in 1981. To his family's admitting that he had given his all to sabotage the Carter administration effort to pull off the long-suspected October surprise. Former world leader has also corroborated the story, as The Intercept John Swartz pointed out, on the occasion of the death of former Iranian President Abu Shah Banassar, the country first following the revolution. The leader had written in his 1991 memoir that Americans close to Reagan had proposed to the nephew of Iran's post-revolutionary supreme leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, a secret agreement between the leader. And then in late October 1980, everyone was already discussing the agreement with the Americans of the Reagan team. 22 years later, Banassar again repeated this charge, adding that the deal between Khomeini and Reagan had prevented his and Carter's efforts to resolve the crisis, but the two of his advisors executed by covering his regime because they had become aware of this secret. Others who have affirmed the existence of such a deal include former Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir, who told to late Robert Perry that of course there was such an agreement, and former Palestinian President Yasser Arafat and one of his senior aides who both affirmed the Republican offers a deal to the Palestinian Liberation Organization if they help keep the hostages in Iran. Years later, Perry also discovered in a covered women's bathroom in the parking garage in a federal building a report sent by Moscow to the House Task Force to investigate the story, which seemingly backed up the claims it was left out of the task force final report. In other words, there was a good reason to believe the story long before this past weekend in 2023 that the latest reporting by the New York Times offered even more reason. Yet the October surprise was dismissed widely and confidently, often by being slapped with the instantly delegitimizing label of conspiracy theory, a term thrown around with breathless responsibility in the ironically named post-truth era. The evidence for the story was a myth, Blair, the 1991 Newsweek headline, the contents of which declare is a conspiracy theory run wild, with the New Republic confidently deemed it a total fabrication. One of the co-authors of the story was Steve Emerson, later wound up on Fox spreading racist nonsense about Muslims controlling British cities. It's never happened assorted by hard-right Daniel Pipes in George Massey's University History News Network, claiming it was merely the guilty pleasure of die-hard conspiracy theories. Like Emerson, Pipes is also an anti-Muslim racist who warned about massive segregation of brown-skinned people cooking strange food and maintaining different standards of hygiene, and once expressed concern that the enfranchisement of American Muslims will threaten Jews. As recently as 2012, a Daily Beast headline declared the October surprise is still getting debunked. In other words, according to all the serious people, the October surprise story was misinformation, a conspiracy theory, fake news, and so on. Until more evidence came to light, it turns out it wasn't. Now this should inspire confidence to the traditional gatekeepers of political discourse, politicians, the mainstream press, intellectuals in establishment circles, and the fact checkers and government bureaucrats that treat their words as gospel can be trusted with responsible regulatory misinformation. Real censorship powers many such figures long for these days. It's also a reminder that contrary to the fairy tale, the public is being fed by many of these same sources. US politics and GOP were far from bastions of decency and righteousness until the dastardly Donald Trump came along and messed everything up. It was Reagan, the Republican president most often cast these days as Trump's polar opposite, who carried out something close to treason to win an election, before carrying out a host of other crimes and outrages president. Everything in our scandal-filled times is sadly part of the course for American politics.